Hello, my name is G. Brady Leonardos. Welcome to my presentation. There have been some, I for one, that have said that atheism and logic don't mix. In other words, whether it be a hard atheism, a soft atheism, an agnostic atheism, a postmodern atheism, an atheism that comes from philosophical skepticism, or an atheism from a radical scientism point of view. In every form of atheism, there is an element present that will not allow for inductive or deductive reasoning. I know there are a lot of atheists out there right now listening that are saying to themselves, hey, wait a second, this is nonsense. I'm an atheist and I use logic all the time. I know, I understand what you're thinking. I'm just asking you to take a moment, listen to the presentation, hear my thinking, and see if at the end you agree or disagree with me that atheism and logic don't mix. I'm including an email address at the end for your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, and I do hope you will contribute to the conversation. Let's first look at what we can expect from this presentation. This short presentation is intended to help you think thoughts you may never have entertained before. I would like you to think about the necessary implications concerning fundamental reality if any kind of atheism is the actual state of affairs. In a moment, we will look at an assumption, an element, if you will, that is found in every form of atheism, one that must be true, and by that I mean the actual state of affairs, if our universe is without an ultimate cosmic designer who intentionally created it. Today, we will examine the necessary implications of that assumption, and I think you will see that the implications will indeed confirm my thesis. Now that we've seen what this presentation is, let's take a look at what it is not. This presentation is not meant to be a comprehensive presentation, but rather it is an outline of an argument. It is something to get us thinking and hopefully to begin a conversation among rational people. I'm not so much concerned that you agree with me at the end, but rather that we share a clarity on the topic. You see, you will not be asked to set your mind aside. On the contrary, you'll be asked to use your mind, to use critical thinking, and to employ logic. Also, this is not a religious presentation trying to prove the existence of God. God has nothing to do with this presentation or its conclusion. We don't need to refer to any religious precepts in order to examine this one element of atheism or its implications. And lastly, you will not be asked to pray at the end. Oh, and one more thing. This presentation is not an attempt to prove atheism false. And you see how that will work out as we go along. Well, I hope that helped set the expectations about this presentation. Now, let's move on to what this topic is really about. Our topic, the topic of this presentation, only deals with one element that is common to all forms of atheism. That element we will call unintentionalism. When I use the word unintentionalism, I mean by it that things are the way they are without intent. Things are the way they are accidentally, by happenstance, by pure chance. That there is no reason that anything is what it is. Now, whenever a concept such as unintentionalism comes before us, we can always ask the question, what are the necessary implications of the concept? In other words, if this concept is true, if it is the actual state of affairs of our universe, what are the necessary implications of that concept? And several of them pop up before us when we talk about unintentionalism. The first three we'll look at is the physical, the temporal, and inductive. Let's take them in order. The physical implication is that there is no reason that any two particles that exist should have a particular relationship at all, let alone that 10 to the 80th particles, by the way, that's the approximate number of particles that physicists tell us exist in the universe, that these should have any specific relationship at all to any other particles. So the idea is that no two particles should have any specific relationship because any relationship is unintentional. It's by accident. Next, temporally, there should be no reason that any accidental relationship between any two particles should remain constant from 1 nanosecond to the next, let alone for 13.7 or 13.8 billion years. If the actual state of affairs is that everything is what it is by pure chance and remains so by accident from 1 nanosecond to the next, then the basic principles of induction, which is our third implication, such as the correspondence of our perceptions to a material world external to our minds, or cause and effect, and the uniformity of nature, these all become unreasoned positions. By that I mean we have no reason to believe that cause and effect and nature in general will act in the same way in the future, or even that nature has acted in a specific way in the past. Induction itself could no longer be held as a rational methodology, but at best could only be held as mere dogma. Here is what I'm going to ask you to do. I want you to use a little critical thinking. Think about it. If everything is what it is unintentionally, accidentally, without reason, then one cannot offer a reason for anything to be what it is. We can't offer a reason for things being what they are when our first premise is that there is no reason things are what they are. So, if unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, then we cannot find any reason, no background explanation for things to be what they are. The implication of this is very serious. For instance, the job of science is to provide us with reasons of what, how, and why things are the way they are and remain the way they are. But if unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, there is no reason that can be given. A further implication of unintentionalism would be its application to our ability to know. In other words, if our ability to know is unintentional, we would have no reason to believe that we really can know anything at all. If any of our ideas about reality actually corresponded to reality, this too would be by complete accident, by pure chance, each and every time there was a correspondence. Thus, we could never know which, if any, of our perceptions and ideas about reality could be trusted as actually portraying reality, even if, by accident, every idea we had about reality did correspond to reality. We would not be in the position to know that those ideas did correspond. we would have no way of determining the correspondence between our idea of reality and reality itself. There could be no test, no way to verify or falsify if any correspondence actually occurred. We could blindly believe in that correspondence, but that would be all it is. Pure fideism. Let's go back to induction just for a moment and ask the question, what do these implications do to inductive reasoning? As you may already have figured out, if unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, the way the universe really is, we have no reason to think that any of the pillars of induction are in play. As we have already seen in previous slides, unintentionalism leaves us unable to know whether or not our perceptions and ideas about an external world in any way correspond to that world. The reason most people believe in cause and effect and the uniformity of nature is because perceptions they believe are accurate, or at least generally accurate, representations of a real world. If unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, there is no reason to think that at all. Here's an important point. It is not that unintentionalism leaves us with insufficient reason to affirm the pillars of induction, but that unintentionalism eliminates the possibility of us knowing about them at all. Unintentionalism brings inductions to its knees, then sweeps it away as a viable way of knowing about reality and the existence of things outside of ourselves. In other words, if we have no way of knowing about the correspondence between our perceptions in the world, or cause and effect, or the uniformity of nature, we have no way to come to inductive conclusions. The results are similar when we look at deductive logic. In deductive logic, to come to a sound conclusion, two things are required in the syllogism. One, that the form of the argument is a valid logical form. And the second thing is that the premises are true. If unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, we could never know if any premise, if any fact about reality is true or even approximately true. Therefore, if unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, we could never form a sound, logical conclusion. Okay, now let's bring this whole thing together. I want to ask you at this point to really put on your thinking caps and stay with me. We're going to put together our final syllogism, our final argument here, which will bring us to our main point. I want you to use critical thinking. I want you to use logic here. Here we go. The first premise: the common element of all atheistic positions is unintentionalism. Our second premise: if unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, then we could never form inductive or deductive conclusions. And here's the implications of those two premises. It follows directly from them. Therefore, if any form of atheism is the actual state of affairs, we could never form inductive or deductive conclusions. In other words, atheism and logic don't mix. So let's wrap this up with a quick overview of what we've just gone over. This is not meant to be a formal logical argument, but just some bullet points to remind us of what has gone before. So, if atheism and the underlying unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, then there is no reason anything is what it is or should remain what it is. There is no reason that our knowledge about the world should correspond to the world, nor could we know if it did. Thus, there is no reason to believe induction can come to cogent, strong conclusions about the world, And again, thus, there's no reason to believe that deduction can come to valid, sound conclusions about the world. Thus, atheism and logic don't mix. Now let's go back for a moment to the beginning of this presentation and the objection that I brought up. So many times when I bring up the idea that atheism and logic don't mix, atheists will say to me, hey, wait a second, this is nonsense. I'm an atheist and I use logic all the time. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying you're not an atheist. I'm not saying you don't use logic all the time. Inductive, deductive logic, of course you do. What I am saying is you're not able to get to that logic from your atheist position. In other words, you're not doing logic because it flows from the atheism, but you're doing it in spite of the atheism. Unintentionalism does not let you get there, as we have seen. The next question is, am I saying that this argument proves that unintentionalism and or atheism is false? The answer to that is a big no. It is possible that unintentionalism is true. But if that were the case, the implications that we've already discussed about unintentionalism would also be true. We couldn't know that unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, and we couldn't even discuss it meaningfully, because we could never know if any of our thoughts about the universe are accurate in any way, shape, or form. Let me clarify this last point. The basic problem is that we can't talk about the position of unintentionalism from within the position or while holding that position. In other words, if we assume that unintentionalism is the actual state of affairs, we must also assume that we can't know if any of our ideas about the universe, including unintentionalism, actually correspond to the universe. Logic becomes useless, and with it, so do all the things based on logic, such as grammar and math. In effect, the only way to have a meaningful discussion about unintentionalism is to assume that it's not the actual state of affairs. This also implies that the only way we can have a meaningful conversation about anything is to assume that unintentionalism is not the actual state of affairs. But once again, this would be just an assumption. The last question we can ask here is, can I be wrong about all of this? And the answer is yes. But you see, it doesn't matter if you think that I'm wrong or if you think that I presented a crazy argument here, because what I have presented is the negative case. I have offered logical, rational reasons to think that if unintentionalism is true, then we cannot know anything. If I can shorten this whole presentation to one proposition, it would be an unintentional reality does not have the necessary and sufficient preconditions for knowledge. But once again, this is the negative case. The affirmative position is the one assumed by atheists without any rational reason each and every day. That position is that the universe actually is unintentional, accidental, that everything is what it is by pure chance and without reason, and that in such a universe, knowledge is possible. In other words, that an unintentional universe does have the necessary and sufficient preconditions for knowledge. The burden of proof for this view falls on the one making the positive claim, the one saying that this proposition is possibly true. So, even if I'm completely wrong, there would still be no reason to think that one can get from any form of atheism to knowledge until that case is made. Until that case is made, the rational position would be to hold a lack of belief that atheism can get one to knowledge, given unintentionalism. Now, I realize that this is a short presentation, and much more could be discussed and said. So, for more information, let me give you an email address here. The email address is unintentionalism@yahoo.com. I'll be putting together a follow-up video answering and discussing questions on the topic using some of the better objections and comments that come in. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for watching this presentation. I look forward to hearing from you. Once again, this is G. Brady Leonardos, and this presentation was Atheism and Logic Don't Mix.